There is good news on the economic front. India's growth has surpassed all expectations. The latest GDP data is out. India remains the world's fastest growing major economy. From January to March this year, India's GDP grew at 7.8%. For the entire financial year, the growth rate stood at 8.2%. Now, these figures beat all projections, including those of the International Monetary Fund and India's own central bank. They had predicted India's growth to be somewhere between 7 and 8%. It turned out to be 8.2%. There are four sectors that are driving this growth: manufacturing, mining, construction, and the services sector. They've all shown good numbers. So what does this mean for the government and for the people of India? For the government, this is obviously a big win, an endorsement of its economic policy, and the timing couldn't have been better. Tomorrow is the final phase of voting in the general election, so strong growth gives a boost to the incumbent. And there's another important takeaway. This is about India's fiscal position. The government's finances seem to be in better shape. Today, India has reported a fiscal deficit of 5.6%. The government had set a target of 5.8%. They've got 5.6%, so the deficit is actually lower. And what is fiscal deficit? It is the difference between the government's expenses and revenues. If there is a gap, if the expenditure is more than the earning, then the government has to borrow money or sell some assets to cover expenses, because they're spending more than they're earning. But now this gap or deficit seems to be narrowing, and the government has met both its revenue and tax collection targets. So the finances are well managed. In the last budget speech, India's finance minister had set an even more ambitious target to rein in the fiscal deficit. Listen to this.
We continue on the path of fiscal consolidation, as announced in my budget speech of 2021-22, to reduce fiscal deficit below 4.5% by 25-26. The fiscal deficit in 2024-25 is estimated to be 5.1% of GDP, adhering to that path.
Right now they are at 5.6%. So far the government seems to be on track. And what are the takeaways for the people of India? How do these GDP numbers affect the people? This growth indicates stability. At the macro level, India remains largely unaffected by the uncertainty in the global economy, and this is likely to continue for the rest of the year. India's Reserve Bank has put out a new projection. It expects the economy to keep growing at 7%. This is till March next year. So that's all good. But there are some signs of short-term distress. For instance, consumption numbers look sluggish. Private consumption remained unchanged at 4% in the last quarter. It did not grow. What is private consumption? The everyday expenses of people on stuff like food and clothes, your electricity and water bills, even your spending on holidays, all of this is covered under private consumption, the money that you and I spend. And it represents almost 60% of the GDP. If private consumption remains static, if it does not grow, it means that people are not spending money. They're reluctant to part with their money, and it's never good for any economy. So why is private consumption sluggish in India? The next set of numbers could explain why. Households are taking on more liabilities, more debts. And this accounts for 5.7% of the GDP now, which is at an all-time high. Plus, the savings of Indian households have shrunk. 10 years ago, these savings made up more than 7% of the economy. Today, they are at 5.2%, which is a record low. And this could be a reflection of the job market. It remains tough. India's working population is rising by the year, but there are fewer new jobs being created. And now wages too could be declining. Again, we have some data. Wages in urban India are falling by close to 3% every year. Even having an MBA does not guarantee a job anymore, and I'm not the one saying this. Deloitte has published a report. It says fewer MBA graduates will be placed this year. They are projecting a 33% drop. This is the drop in campus placement budgets compared to last year, 33% lower. It could mean fewer jobs or lower salaries or both. So while India's growth numbers look promising, the benefits of this growth remain largely untapped, and that is the challenge that India's next government will have to address.
South Africa's May 29th elections.
It was the start of change in the country.
We are on the verge of history.
I am standing here at the forefront of change where voices echo the call for action.
The nation grapples with an unemployment crisis. As South Africans prepare to cast their votes, the question looms, will the winds of change usher in a new era, or will the legacy of the past maintain its grip on the future?